So when I first got into jazz, the first music I was listening to at that time was mostly like the Marsalis brothers, Wynton Marsalis and Branford Marsalis, which means I was listening to Jeff Tain Watts. And I was obsessed with Jeff Tain Watts. He was the man, still is the man. I was all into his playing. Then all of a sudden, like Kenny Garrett, Joshua Redmond started coming out. And then I got all into Brian Blade and Lewis Nash and all these guys. And they were kind of the first guys I was checking out. And then I would like talk to other jazz musicians or teachers or whatnot, and they'd all say stuff like, yeah, but I mean, you really need to go check out Papa Joe Jones, and you need to check out Sid Catlett, and you need to check out Baby Dodds. Like, that's where this music came from. And so, they're right. And so I did that, and I put on these old records. I got this like Count Basie little box set, right, and I made sure Papa Joe Jones was the drummer and all of it. And to my ears, it sounded like this. It didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't even hear that there was a drummer on the record. My ears were not ready for it. But I listened to it over and over again. It was like I was taking my vegetables or taking my vitamins. But all along, like I was pulled back to Tain and all those guys. And then I was also told, like, man, you got to check out Charlie Parker. That's where all this bebop language comes from. And I actually remember it was on a band trip, and I bought a cassette tape of Charlie Parker. The tape was called Flying High, and it was a bunch of Charlie Parker tunes. And I could see on the cassette, like, I recognized most of the titles. I was on the band trip, like, showing off. I wanted everyone to see that this is the tape I had. I was constantly, like, opening up the cassette tape and, like, making sure everybody could see it was Charlie Parker. I was, like, super cool kid, had the Charlie Parker record. I wasn't listening to all that lame new stuff now. And I put it in, and it just, that's literally what it sounded like to me. And I remembered feeling, for both of those times, like, so embarrassed. It's like, I mean, I know this stuff is supposed to be killing, but I cannot hear it. But what I did do was I was checking out Tain, I was checking out Brian Blade and Lewis Nash and all these great drummers. Let's just take Tain, for example. Tain would play on some stuff, and then he'd play a song, and it would be like a Coltrane-ish song, or so I heard, or maybe it was a John Coltrane song. And so then I would go back and then check out that original, and I would hear Elvin Jones. And when I heard Elvin, I could hear Tain in Elvin, or I could hear Elvin in Tain, as it were, right? And then I heard some Miles Davis with Tony Williams, and I could hear some Tain in there. And I could hear, Philly Joe Jones. I started hearing these drummers from like the 60s and 70s that were clearly direct influences on my direct influences. So then I got into Elvin, and I got into Tony, and got into those guys. And then, like, let's say Tony, right? Tony, particularly early on, was playing with Miles. He was playing a lot of tunes that Miles had already previously played. So then I started checking out those records and heard Jimmy Cobb. And I heard early Tony sounding a lot like Jimmy Cobb. Duh, he took over that band, so he's going to sound, obviously he's listened to a lot of Jimmy Cobb. And then I listened to Philly Joe Jones and started checking out those guys. And then those guys kind of sent me back, and before you know it, granted it just takes years, but eventually I got back to the point where I heard Papa Joe Jones, and I was like, this dude is amazing. And then I could hear Baby Dodds, and I could hear Sid Catlett, and all these killing drummers. I talked to plenty of other jazz musicians about this and found out that I was not alone. That for whatever reason, there's this thing out there that you need to go back to the source. And yes, you do need to go back to the source. Of course you need to go back to the source. But you don't need to go right there, like right now. You might not be ready for it. Don't start at the beginning of the timeline. Don't go all the way back to, like Baby Dodds and like eat your vegetables all the way up, right? Instead, do it like almost everyone does it. I mean, that's what Coltrane did. Coltrane listened to the guys that he grew up listening to, and then, I got this interview where he's talking about how he's starting to go backwards in time and checking out Sidney Bechet and all these guys, right? So that's pretty much how how we naturally do it. Don't let somebody sway you. If you're checking out some modern guys now, don't feel like you have to let that go and then immediately go back to some old drummer that you know of and you know he's amazing, but you just can't hear it yet. Be cool with working backwards. Be cool with checking out the guy you love now, and then who was his influence, and then who was that person's influence. And to me, that's a much more natural way to learn the history of this music than be told or feel like it's a must that you go right back to the beginning and start over, because chances are you won't be ready for it. Really, it's about context. You probably will have a hard time getting the context. But also, don't discount the fidelity issue. The records we're listening to now are recorded way better. It's hard to listen to an Ellington record from the 40s if you really haven't checked out much stuff before the 60s. So, but if you work your way backwards, 60s to the 50s isn't a bad jump. 50s to 40s isn't bad. 40s to 30s, hey, what do you know? You're listening to stuff from the 30s, and you can hear everything now. Check out who you love, the guys and girls that you really like they're playing, and then work your way backwards and be cool with that, and don't listen to those people telling you that, oh, you don't listen to those guys, go right back to the source. Yeah, you know what? You're going to get there. We all got there. We all went there basically the same path. So don't let that sway you. Okay, see you on the next one. Good luck.